Hey everyone, welcome back to the Study English Online, your podcast for easy English conversation, real daily life talk, and simple listening practice.
I'm Jake.
And I'm Anna. So Jake, be honest, did you overthink anything today already?
Actually, yes. I spent way too long deciding how to word a simple message to a colleague, rewriting it about 5 times.
That's such a classic overthinking moment. A simple message turning into a whole mental production.
Exactly, and I think that's such a relatable, perfect topic for today. Today we're talking about overthinking, what it actually is, why we do it, and useful English vocabulary and techniques for managing it.
This connects so naturally to our episode on stress and anxiety too, since overthinking is often closely tied to both of those experiences.
Right, and honestly, I think almost everyone listening right now can relate to this in some way. Replaying conversations, worrying about small decisions, imagining worst-case scenarios.
Exactly. So today, let's talk about it together, gently, and with some genuinely useful, practical tools.
Right, and honestly, even preparing for this episode, I noticed myself thinking a little too much about how to explain some of these ideas clearly, which felt like a fitting, slightly funny bit of irony.
That's very on brand for today's topic, overthinking about how to talk about overthinking.
Before we start, quick reminder, if you enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might relate to today's topic.
And tell us in the comments, what's something you tend to overthink? Great writing practice, too.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's start simple. Jake, how would you define overthinking?
I'd say it's thinking about something far more than necessary, replaying it, analyzing it, imagining different outcomes well beyond what's actually useful or productive.
Right, and I think that's such an important distinction. Some thinking is genuinely useful, planning, problem solving, but overthinking crosses into repetitive, often anxious thinking that doesn't actually lead anywhere new or helpful.
Exactly, and overthinking often shows up in 2 main forms: replaying the past, did I say the wrong thing? Or worrying about the future, what if this goes wrong?
Right. Both involve your mind circling the same thoughts repeatedly without actually resolving or moving past them.
I also think it's worth mentioning overthinking can feel productive in the moment, like you're actively working through a problem, even when, objectively, no new progress is actually being made.
Right. That's exactly what makes it so tricky to recognize. It disguises itself as useful effort, when really it's often just repetitive, anxious circling dressed up as problem solving.
I also want to mention something worth considering, the actual real costs of overthinking, since it's easy to underestimate how much it takes from us.
Right. Overthinking costs time, obviously, hours that could be spent resting, connecting with others, or actually enjoying life, instead spent circling the same unresolved thoughts.
It also costs energy, both mental and physical, since our bodies often respond to overthinking with real stress responses, tension, fatigue, even though the threat is often just a thought, not an actual present danger.
Right, and it can cost connection too. Spending so much time inside our own heads sometimes means missing out on being fully present with the people around us.
Exactly, and recognizing these real costs, rather than assuming overthinking is a harmless or even helpful habit, can actually provide some useful motivation to practice the techniques we're sharing today.
I also think it's worth mentioning opportunity cost specifically. All that time spent overthinking is time not spent on something else, actually enjoying a moment, making progress on a real task, or simply resting.
Right, and once you start noticing overthinking through that lens, as genuinely costing you real limited time and energy, rather than being a neutral or harmless habit, it becomes a lot easier to feel motivated to interrupt it.
Jake, do you have a personal story about overthinking?
Sure, actually connected to that email story I mentioned in our Bad Workday episode. After I sent that mass email by accident, I spent literally hours afterward replaying it in my head, imagining what everyone must be thinking of me.
That sounds exhausting on top of the original stressful moment itself.
It really was, honestly. The overthinking afterwards was almost worse than the original mistake itself.
What eventually helped you stop that cycle?
A friend actually pointed out something simple but really helpful. She asked, "Is thinking about this anymore actually going to change anything?" And honestly, the answer was no. The email was already sent, the situation was already handled.
That's such a clarifying question, honestly.
Right, and ever since then, whenever I notice myself overthinking something already finished, I try to ask myself that same question, which usually helps me let it go a little faster.
Did it feel strange at first, trying to consciously interrupt a thought pattern that had probably become pretty automatic?
Definitely. In the beginning, it felt a little forced, almost like I was fighting against my own natural instinct. But with repeated practice, asking that question became more automatic too, almost replacing the old habit of endless replaying.
That's such an encouraging thing to hear, that a new, healthier mental habit can genuinely replace an old, unhelpful one with enough consistent practice.
Exactly. And honestly, that email mistake, which felt so significant at the time, is barely a memory now, which really proves the point. Most of what we overthink truly doesn't matter nearly as much in the long run. Anna, what about you?
Mine is about overthinking future decisions specifically. I used to spend enormous amounts of mental energy imagining every possible outcome before making even fairly small decisions.
That sounds like it would make even simple choices feel really heavy.
Exactly. And eventually, I realized this pattern wasn't actually helping me make better decisions. It was just creating a lot of unnecessary stress and delay.
So what changed?
I started setting small time limits for decisions. I'll think about this for 10 minutes, then decide, which forced me to trust my judgment more rather than endlessly analyzing every possibility.
That's such a practical, simple technique, and I imagine it probably felt uncomfortable at first, trusting a faster decision.
It really did, but over time, it genuinely reduced my overthinking significantly, and honestly, my decisions weren't any worse for it either.
Was there a specific moment where you really noticed this new approach working well?
Actually, yes. I remember choosing between two apartments, something I would have previously spent days agonizing over. But instead, I gave myself that same 10-minute window, made a decision, and moved forward.
And how did that decision turn out?
Honestly, it turned out completely fine, just like most of my quickly made decisions do, which really confirmed for me that all that additional overthinking time in the past hadn't actually been improving my choices at all.
Let's talk a little about why overthinking happens in the first place.
Right. Often it's connected to a desire for control or certainty. If we think about something enough, we might feel like we can prevent something bad from happening, even though that's often not really true.
Exactly. And overthinking can also come from perfectionism, wanting to get something exactly right, or fear of judgment, worrying excessively about how others perceive us.
Right, and sometimes it's simply a mental habit, a pattern our brain has practiced so often that it happens almost automatically without us consciously choosing to think that way.
I also think it's worth mentioning that overthinking can sometimes be connected to past experiences too. If a mistake once led to a genuinely bad outcome, our brain might learn to over-prepare for similar situations in the future, even when the actual risk is much smaller now.
Right, that's such an understandable, almost protective origin for the pattern, even though it often ends up being disproportionate to the actual present-day situation.
Exactly, and simply understanding where the pattern might have come from without judgment can actually make it easier to gently work on adjusting it, rather than feeling frustrated or confused about why it happens at all.
Let's build out some useful vocabulary for talking about overthinking specifically. I'm overthinking this, my mind won't stop racing, or I keep going over this in my head, all describe the overthinking experience directly.
A few more phrases, I can't turn my brain off, or I'm stuck in my head, both capture that feeling of mental exhaustion from constant circling thoughts.
And spiraling, which we mentioned in our stress episode 2, describes when overthinking builds on itself, each thought making the next one feel bigger and more urgent.
Let's act out a quick example. You seem a little distracted today.
Yeah, honestly, I can't turn my brain off. I keep replaying this conversation I had earlier.
Do you want to talk it through, or would it help to just take a break from it for a bit?
Right, that's such a natural, complete exchange, using several of today's phrases together in a real, caring conversation.
Describing the cycle. I'm stuck in a loop, or I keep replaying this, describe that repetitive circular quality of overthinking specifically.
Right, and going around in circles is another useful idiom here, describing thoughts that never actually reach a conclusion, just repeat endlessly.
We could also say, I'm chasing my own tail, a slightly playful way to describe the same frustrating, unproductive mental cycle.
Expressing a desire to stop. I just need to let this go, or I know I'm overanalyzing this. Acknowledge the pattern while expressing a wish to move past it.
A few more phrases, I need to get out of my own head about this, or I'm ready to move on from this. Both express a genuine intention to stop the overthinking cycle.
Asking for help with overthinking. Can you help me get out of my head about this? Or, I think I'm overthinking. Can you give me some perspective? Invite outside support specifically for this pattern.
Right, and can you talk some sense into me is a more casual, friendly version of the same request, often used with close friends specifically.
Let's cover some practical techniques for managing overthinking.
The 10-minute rule. Setting a specific time limit for a decision or thought, then moving forward, connecting to Anna's story earlier.
Right, and this works because it gives your mind a clear boundary rather than allowing unlimited, open-ended time to keep circling the same thoughts.
Exactly, and even if the decision doesn't feel perfectly resolved after 10 minutes, moving forward anyway usually turns out just fine, similar to what Anna found in her own experience.
The will this matter question. Asking yourself, will this matter in a week, a month, a year, can help put an overthought situation into healthier perspective.
Right, for most everyday overthinking, small mistakes, minor decisions, awkward moments, the honest answer is usually no, it won't matter nearly as much later as it feels like it does right now.
Exactly, and this question is honestly one of my personal favorites since it works quickly and requires no special tools, just a simple, honest moment of reflection.
Writing it down. Sometimes simply writing down the overthinking thoughts can help release them from constantly circling in your mind.
Right, this connects to our small habits episode too. Even just 2 or 3 sentences, I keep worrying about this specific thing, can create a small sense of relief, almost like setting the thought down outside of your head.
Exactly, and sometimes seeing the thought written down plainly also reveals how repetitive or exaggerated it's actually become, which itself can help loosen its grip a little.
Redirecting attention, engaging in an absorbing activity, movement, a hobby, conversation, can help interrupt an overthinking cycle by redirecting your mental focus elsewhere.
Right, and this works best with activities that genuinely require some focus, a puzzle, exercise, cooking, rather than passive activities like scrolling, which don't fully occupy your attention enough to interrupt the cycle.
Exactly. The key is finding something engaging enough to naturally pull your mind away from the repetitive thought loop, even just temporarily.
I want to break down overthinking a little further too, since it often shows up in 2 fairly distinct patterns.
Right. The first is often called rumination, which involves replaying past events repeatedly. Why did I say that? Or I should have done this differently.
And the second is often called worry, which involves repeatedly imagining future uncertain outcomes. What if this goes wrong? Or what if they think badly of me?
Right, and interestingly, these two patterns often benefit from slightly different approaches. Rumination about the past often responds well to the will this matter question and to actively redirecting attention, since the event is already finished and can't be changed.
While worry about the future sometimes benefits more from a specific technique called worry time, setting a specific limited period each day to actively worry, and then consciously postponing worried thought outside that window until the next scheduled time.
That's such an interesting technique, deliberately scheduling worry rather than trying to eliminate it completely.
Right, and it works because it acknowledges the worry as valid without letting it take over your entire day, giving it a specific, contained space instead.
I actually think this technique is so clever because it doesn't try to eliminate worry completely, which honestly rarely works. It just contains it, which feels much more realistic and achievable.
Exactly. And over time, a lot of people who try this technique report that when their scheduled worry time actually arrives, the worry often feels smaller or less urgent than it did earlier in the day, sometimes barely worth revisiting at all.
Right, and I also think it's worth mentioning, recognizing which type, rumination, or worry you're experiencing in a given moment isn't always perfectly clean or obvious. Sometimes they overlap or blend together too.
Exactly, and that's completely fine. These categories are helpful tools for understanding, not strict, rigid boxes. Use whichever techniques feel most relevant to what you're actually experiencing in the moment.
Let's clear up a few myths about overthinking too.
Myth 1. Overthinking means I care more or I'm being more responsible. Actually, overthinking often doesn't lead to better outcomes than thoughtful, time-limited consideration. It mostly just adds unnecessary stress without improving the actual decision or outcome.
Right. Caring about something and overthinking it aren't the same thing at all. You can genuinely care while still keeping your thinking time-limited and productive.
Myth number 2. If I think about this enough, I'll eventually feel completely certain. Certainty often isn't actually achievable through more thinking alone, especially for situations involving other people's reactions or future unknown events.
Right, some situations simply involve inherent uncertainty. No amount of additional thinking will fully resolve that, and accepting this can actually reduce a lot of unnecessary overthinking.
I think that's honestly one of the hardest but most freeing realizations, accepting that some uncertainty is simply part of life rather than something we can eliminate entirely through enough mental effort. Myth 3. Overthinking is just how my brain works. I can't change it. While some people may have a natural tendency toward more thinking, the specific patterns and habits around overthinking can genuinely be recognized and adjusted with practice, just like any other habit.
I also want to specifically mention nighttime overthinking, since so many people experience their minds racing right when they're trying to fall asleep.
Right. This happens partly because nighttime removes a lot of the usual daytime distractions, work, conversations, tasks, leaving more open mental space for thoughts to surface and circle.
Exactly, and useful techniques here include keeping a small notepad by your bed, writing down any circling thoughts briefly, which can help release them without needing to fully solve them right then.
Right, and the worry time technique we mentioned earlier can help here too. If a worried thought appears at night, gently reminding yourself, I'll think about this during my scheduled worry time tomorrow, can help postpone it until a more appropriate moment.
Exactly, and this connects to our Small Habits episode 2, a calm, consistent bedtime routine, reducing screens, a little quiet reading, can genuinely reduce how often overthinking shows up right at bedtime.
I've actually noticed this myself. On nights when I look at my phone right up until trying to sleep, my mind mind tends to race much more than on nights when I have even just 15 minutes of quiet, screen-free time beforehand.
That's such a relatable observation, and it really shows how much our evening habits can influence whether our mind stays calm or starts spiraling right when we're trying to rest.
Let's also talk about overthinking specifically within relationships, since this is such a common, often painful pattern.
Right, replaying a conversation with a partner or friend, analyzing a text message for hidden meaning, or worrying excessively about what someone really thinks of you are all really common relationship-specific overthinking patterns.
Exactly, and this connects to our friendship and family episodes too. Sometimes the healthiest response is simply asking directly rather than continuing to guess and analyze privately.
Right, a simple, "I've been wondering about something, can we talk about it?" often resolves in minutes what hours of private overthinking never could.
Exactly, and this really highlights something important about overthinking generally. So much of it happens in isolation, inside our own heads, when a direct, honest conversation could resolve the uncertainty so much more efficiently.
I also think it's worth mentioning sometimes we avoid asking directly because we're afraid of the answer. But honestly, even a difficult answer usually feels more manageable than endless, uncertain speculation.
Right. Uncertainty itself is often more uncomfortable than actually knowing. Even when the answer isn't what we were hoping for, at least it gives us something clear to respond to, rather than an endless loop of guessing.
I also want to draw a clear line between overthinking and genuinely careful, useful thinking, since it's important not to villainize thoughtfulness itself.
Right. Careful thinking, weighing real options, planning ahead, considering consequences, is genuinely valuable and often leads to better decisions and outcomes.
Exactly. The difference really comes down to whether the thinking is moving toward a decision or resolution versus simply repeating the same thoughts without any forward movement or new insight.
Right. A helpful question here is, am I learning anything new by continuing to think about this, or am I just repeating the same worries? If it's the same thoughts circling without new information, that's usually a sign of overthinking rather than useful analysis.
Exactly. And honestly, this distinction is one of the most helpful things to keep in mind, since the goal isn't to stop thinking altogether. It's simply to recognize when thinking has stopped being productive and has become repetitive instead.
I also think it helps to notice the emotional quality of the thinking too. Careful planning often feels fairly calm and structured, while overthinking often feels anxious, urgent, and a little frantic, even when the actual content of the thoughts seems similar on the surface.
Right. That emotional tone is honestly such a useful clue. If thinking about something starts to feel heavy, urgent, or draining rather than calm and productive, that's usually a sign the thinking has crossed over into overthinking territory.
Let's also cover how to support someone else who's caught in an overthinking cycle, since this comes up often in close relationships.
Right. It helps to gently validate the feeling first. "I can see this is really weighing on you," before offering any perspective or suggestions.
Exactly. And asking, do you want help thinking this through, or would it help more to just take your mind off it for a bit? Respects what kind of support they actually need in that moment.
Right. And sometimes the most helpful thing isn't advice at all. It's simply gently inviting them into a different activity, a walk, a change of scenery, which can help interrupt the cycle naturally.
Exactly. And it's worth avoiding phrases like "just stop thinking about it," which, even though well-meaning, rarely actually helps and can sometimes make someone feel dismissed or misunderstood.
Right. A much better approach is gently helping someone use one of today's specific techniques together, like the "will this matter" question, or setting a small time limit together for continuing to think about it.
I also think patience matters a lot here too, since someone caught in an overthinking spiral already feels frustrated with themselves for being stuck, so adding impatience or judgment from someone else usually just makes things feel worse.
Right. Right. Approaching it with warmth and patience rather than frustration, even if it's a pattern you've seen from them many times before, tends to help far more than any specific technique alone.
Let's connect this directly to English learning, too, since overthinking is honestly such a common, sometimes overlooked barrier for language learners specifically.
Right. Overthinking grammar rules mid-conversation, replaying a conversation afterward and cringing at small mistakes, or worrying excessively before speaking are all really common overthinking patterns for English learners.
Exactly. And the techniques we've covered today apply directly here too. The "will this matter" question works beautifully for a small grammar mistake, and redirecting attention can help interrupt anxious overthinking spirals right before speaking.
Right, and this connects to our comfort zone episode too. Overthinking often keeps people stuck in preparation and analysis rather than actually practicing and speaking, which is really the thing that helps the most.
Exactly. So if you notice yourself overthinking your English learning approach itself, worrying whether you're doing it correctly, maybe that's honestly its own small form of overthinking worth letting go of too.
We also received a second story from a listener who used to overthink nearly every decision about her career, spending weeks analyzing options without ever actually moving forward.
Oh, that sounds like such a difficult, paralyzing pattern.
Right. She said she eventually used the 10-minute rule, but expanded slightly for bigger decisions, giving herself one full day to think, write down her thoughts, and then commit to a decision, rather than continuing indefinitely.
That's such a smart adaptation of the technique for a bigger, more significant decision.
Exactly. And she said having that clear boundary, one day, not unlimited time, genuinely helped her finally move forward with a career change she'd been overthinking for months.
That's such a great example of how these techniques can scale to fit different sizes of decisions, not just small, everyday ones.
Right, and she specifically mentioned that the decision itself turned out well, which reinforced for her that all those additional weeks and months of overthinking really hadn't been necessary at all.
Did she mention anything about how it felt in the moment of finally committing after so much prior hesitation?
She said it actually felt like relief more than fear, almost like putting down something heavy she'd been carrying around for months without realizing quite how tiring it had become.
That's such a beautiful way to describe it. The weight of unresolved overthinking and the genuine relief of finally setting it down through a clear decision. We received a great message from a listener connecting to today's topic.
Oh, tell us.
She said she used to overthink nearly every English conversation afterward, replaying small mistakes for hours.
That's such a common, exhausting pattern for language learners specifically.
Right, and she said using the "will this matter" question specifically helped her realize that small English mistakes really don't matter nearly as much as her overthinking made them feel in the moment.
Did she mention how this shift affected her willingness to actually speak English more often?
She did, actually. She said once the overthinking after conversations decreased, she felt much more willing to initiate new conversations too, since the fear of a long, difficult replay session afterward was no longer holding her back as much.
That's such a great example of how reducing overthinking doesn't just help after the fact. It actually opens up more willingness to engage in the first place, which connects so nicely to our comfort zone episode too. We got a question. What if I overthink because I genuinely want to avoid making a mistake?
That's such an understandable motivation. It helps to remember that overthinking often doesn't actually prevent mistakes, it just adds stress, while thoughtful, time-limited consideration usually leads to similarly good decisions.
Right. And it also helps to remember that mistakes themselves are rarely as catastrophic as overthinking makes them feel in the anxious moment before making a decision.
Exactly. So really, the fear of making a mistake, while completely understandable, often causes more harm through the overthinking itself than the actual mistake would cause if it happened.
Before we move to practice sentences, I want to share a quick, simple daily exercise listeners can try starting today.
Oh, I like practical exercises. Let's hear it.
Each evening, take just 2 minutes to write down one thing you overthought that day, and next to it, write the outcome, whether it turned out fine, badly, or somewhere in between.
Right, and over a week or two, you'll likely start noticing a clear pattern. Most overthought situations turn out completely fine, or at least far better than the overthinking predicted.
Exactly. And having that real personal evidence, rather than just a general idea, tends to be much more convincing and motivating than simply being told overthinking usually isn't necessary.
Right, it's a small, simple habit, but it builds genuine, personalized proof over time, which can make it much easier to trust the process the next time an overthinking spiral begins.
I think I'm overthinking this, honestly.
I keep replaying this conversation in my head.
Will this actually matter in a month?
I just need to let this go.
Writing it down really helped me stop overthinking.
Let's also try a few slightly longer sentences.
I've been going around in circles about this. I need to just decide.
Is thinking about this anymore actually going to change anything?
I gave myself 1 day to think it over, and then I committed to the decision.
I noticed I was ruminating, so I went for a walk to clear my head.
Try saying one of these sentences out loud today, maybe adjusting it to describe your own situation.
Let's review a few useful words from today's episode.
First, to overanalyze, meaning to think about something in too much detail.
For example, I tend to overanalyze small decisions.
Next, perspective, meaning a particular way of viewing or understanding something.
For example, talking to a friend gave me some helpful perspective.
We also used to ruminate, meaning to think deeply and repeatedly about something, often in an unhelpful way.
For example, I ruminated over that mistake for way too long.
And finally, to let go, meaning to release a thought or feeling rather than continuing to hold on to it.
For example, it took practice, but I finally learned to let it go.
A few more useful words. Paralyzed, meaning unable to act or decide, often due to overthinking or fear.
For example, I felt completely paralyzed trying to choose between the two options.
Certainty, meaning the state of being completely sure about something.
For example, I was searching for certainty, but some decisions just don't offer that.
And finally, worry time, a specific technique referring to a scheduled period set aside for worrying, rather than allowing it throughout the whole day.
For example, I started using worry time, and it really helped contain my anxious thoughts to a specific part of the day.
Try using 2 or 3 of these words today, maybe in a comment describing your own overthinking pattern. We talked about what overthinking actually is and how it differs from useful, productive thinking.
We shared our own stories, my experience overthinking after a work mistake, and Anna's experience overthinking decisions.
We discussed why we overthink, connected to control, perfectionism, and mental habits.
We covered useful vocabulary and practical techniques, time limits, the will this matter question, writing it down, and redirecting attention.
We shared a wonderful listener story about overthinking English conversations specifically.
We also covered the hidden costs of overthinking, the 2 common types of overthinking, common myths, overthinking at night, overthinking in relationships, the difference between overthinking and useful thinking, how to support someone who's overthinking, a simple daily exercise, and a second listener story about a career decision.
Before we close, one last small tip. The next time you notice yourself overthinking something, try asking just one question. Am I learning anything new by continuing to think about this?
Right. If the honest answer is no, that's usually a clear sign it's time to set a small time limit, write it down, or simply redirect your attention elsewhere.
And remember, overthinking doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It's just a really common mental habit, one that genuinely can be gently adjusted with practice.
Right, and if it still feels a little difficult at first to interrupt an overthinking spiral, that's completely normal too. Like anything else we've discussed on this podcast, it tends to get easier with consistent, gentle practice over time.
Next time, we're going to talk about something a little lighter, how to be kind to yourself, small habits and phrases for practicing self-compassion in daily life.
That connects so naturally to today's episode, too, since being gentle with yourself during an overthinking spiral is honestly such an important part of managing it well.
We're really looking forward to that one. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what's something you tend to overthink.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye!
Bye.